I never imagined that the last battle of my life would be fought inside my own home, with the very children I raised. This was the first thought that came to my mind when Jessica, my daughter-in-law, echoed through the phone. I, Margaret, 68 years old, lived an entire life dedicated to my husband Robert and our family. We raised our children, faced the ups and downs of life together, but the real war, the one I never thought I'd face, came without warning. Robert and I always dreamed of a quiet life, away from the hustle and bustle, and our little corner by the lake. He with his calm nature and always so patient, and I, a strong woman who learned to make space for everyone around me, until the moment I realized I was losing myself along the way. We were about to live the peace we so deserved, but what happened was exactly the opposite. My peace was taken without the slightest shame. But what would you do if your home were invaded in such a bold way, with no respect for the years of struggle and sacrifice? Stay until the end of the story, because I will tell you what I learned and how the decision I made changed everything. I promise the ending will surprise you. And before you continue, tell me, what city are you watching this story from? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation of this journey of overcoming. I remember so vividly the dream we shared, Robert and I, of a simple life, a peaceful life. We had both worked tirelessly for decades, our hands worn from years of toil. The dream of a cabin by a quiet lake was like a secret whispered only to us, a dream we had protected and nurtured, believing it was finally time to see it become real. Robert was always the calm one, the steady force beside me. As I sat on the porch, feeling the cool breeze against my skin, I could hear him humming softly as he unpacked our last few boxes. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I knew in that moment that this was it. This was the peace I had worked my whole life for. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. There was a tension in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like the quiet before a storm. What was it? I wondered, and little did I know that very tension was about to break, forever changing everything. We arrived at our new home, and for a moment, I felt as though I had finally found my place. The cabin by the lake felt like the beginning of everything I had been waiting for. I could already hear the sound of the water lapping gently against the shore, and the trees surrounding us whispered as if they were welcoming us. I couldn't stop smiling as I looked at Robert, his face mirroring the peace I felt deep inside. Robert worked quietly beside me, organizing the things we had carried with us for so many years. His hands moved efficiently, as if he knew exactly where everything needed to go. I had spent so many years of my life feeling like I was always running from something, but now, here, in this moment, I felt like I had finally arrived. The days passed slowly, and with each one, I settled more into the idea that this was the life we were meant to have. But there was an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite shake off. Something was changing, and I didn't know what it was, but I had a feeling that before long, the world outside our peaceful little cabin was going to crashing in. It was a quiet afternoon when the phone rang, breaking the peaceful silence that had become so familiar. I had just finished putting away the last of the dishes and was enjoying a cup of tea by the window. Robert was outside, chopping some wood, and I thought to myself how perfect everything seemed. That's when I heard the voice on the other end of the line, Jessica's. "Mom, I'm coming over with 20 relatives. We'll be there this weekend."
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 20? 20 people? My heart dropped into my stomach. In an instant, I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready for them. But Jessica didn't care. She didn't ask. She didn't even give me a chance to prepare myself. The words echoed in my mind. 20 people. Just like that. My mind raced as I tried to understand how this could have happened. Was it because she thought I had nothing else to do? Was it because she assumed I was just sitting here, waiting to cater to her and her family? I looked out the window, the calm of the lake now seeming like a distant memory. How could I have known that my peaceful haven was about to be shattered? As I set the phone down, my hands were trembling. The tea I had been holding slipped from my fingers and spilled on the table, a reminder that everything was about to change. I sat there frozen for a moment, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened. The questions kept coming. Why didn't she ask first? Why did she think I would be okay with this? My heart felt heavy, weighed down by the burden of this sudden responsibility. I had spent so many years raising children, making sure everyone was taken care of, and now I was expected to give up my sanctuary, my peace, just like that? And then there was Robert. He hadn't said a word, and that silence spoke volumes. He had always been the calm one, the one who would shrug off anything that came our way. But this felt different. I could sense a shift in the air, like the thunderclouds had gathered without warning, and the thunder was about to roll. I stood up, wiping the tea from the table, my mind torn between wanting to say something and knowing that whatever I said, nothing would change. How could I find the words to express my feelings? How could I make Robert understand that my heart wasn't ready to open up to this?
Robert was sitting in his favorite chair by the window, staring out at the garden. I could hear the faint rustling of the leaves outside, but his silence filled the room like a heavy fog. I could feel his eyes on me, but he didn't say a word. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he hadn't prepared me for this, but instead, I just sat there, staring back at him, hoping that he would speak. "Margaret, we've been through worse," he finally said, his voice calm, almost detached. "This is just another thing we'll handle together." His words didn't comfort me like they used to. I knew he was trying to ease my mind, but the way he said it felt like a dismissal of everything I was feeling. It was as if he thought that time had prepared me for all of this, for losing my space, for giving up what I had built with my own hands. The tension between us was thick, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he had known this was coming. His calm demeanor seemed almost rehearsed. Had he been keeping this from me? Was he going to just stand by and watch as my sanctuary was taken over? I looked at him, searching his face for answers, but found none. He was as unreadable as ever. The days leading up to Jessica and her family's arrival felt like a slow march toward a battle I had no desire to fight. I had spent my whole life taking care of everyone around me, my children, my husband, my friends, and now I felt like I was being asked to open my home, my sanctuary, to a horde of strangers. Every inch of my being wanted to refuse, but I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. Robert, as usual, seemed unbothered. He busied himself with the practicalities, checking the guest rooms, making sure the fridge was stocked with enough food to feed an army. But I could feel the quiet pressure building inside me. My heart wasn't in it anymore. How could I welcome them when my own peace had been stolen? It was as though I had become invisible in my own home. I walked around, folding sheets, dusting shelves, making sure everything was perfect, and yet I felt more and more like a servant in my own house. The life I had dreamed of, a quiet,
peaceful existence in the cabin by the lake was slipping through my fingers, and no one seemed to care but me.
I had to make a stand. I had to reclaim some sense of control over my own life, over my own space. But how? How does one say no after so many years of saying yes? After decades of giving everything to everyone around me, my children, my husband, my family, how do I finally say, this is mine, this is for me? I remember the night I decided. I stood by the window, watching the stars reflect on the calm waters of the lake. The wind was soft against my skin, and I could hear the faint sound of the trees rustling. I took a deep breath and knew then that I had to do something. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly putting others' needs before my own. I needed to find my voice again, even if it meant disappointing people I loved. The plan began to take shape in my mind. It was simple, really. I wouldn't bend, I wouldn't fold, and when Jessica and her family arrived, I would show them that I was still capable of deciding my own fate. It was time for them to learn that this home wasn't a hotel, and I wasn't their maid. For the first time in years, I felt the surge of something I hadn't felt in ages: strength. Robert and I sat down that evening, both knowing that things were going to escalate quickly. The phone calls, the endless preparations, and Jessica's demands, everything was piling up. But in that moment, as I looked at Robert, I realized he had known this was coming. He always did. He had a quiet way of letting me carry the weight of the world, and now it was time for him to step in, if only a little. "Margaret," he said softly, his voice calm as ever, "I think we need to make this official." I looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean, Robert?" "A contract," he continued, "a rental agreement of sorts. A way to ensure that they understand the boundaries of this place. If they want to stay here, they need to know it's not a free-for-all." His eyes twinkled, almost mischievous. I hadn't seen that look in him for years. It was brilliant, really. A simple yet clever way to assert control over the situation without making it confrontational. We could charge them a nominal rent, enough to make them understand that this wasn't their vacation spot, it was our home. I had no idea how Jessica would react, but I didn't care. The time for being passive was over. The idea brought a small, triumphant smile to my lips. For the first time in weeks, I felt alive again. The day arrived, and with it came the whirlwind of noise and chaos. Jessica and her family arrived at the cabin, their carriages packed to the brim, their chatter already echoing from a mile away. I stood at the door with Robert, a calm that seemed out of place in the midst of the storm that was about to unfold. We had prepared ourselves for this moment, and now I could feel the tension thick in the air. I could see their faces as they pulled into the driveway, expecting a warm, welcoming embrace, a grandmother's love, a holiday in the making. But instead, they were met with the cold reality of the contract. Jessica looked at me, stunned, almost as if she had seen a ghost. The words stuck in her throat, and I could tell she wasn't expecting this. "What's this?" she asked, trying to hide her confusion with forced politeness. "This," I said, handing her the paper, "is the agreement that comes with staying here." Robert stepped in, his voice calm and collected. "We've rented this place to you for the weekend. It's not free, Jessica. We need to maintain some respect for this home." The look on her face was priceless. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, even as my heart tightened in my chest. I wasn't angry. I was simply reclaiming my dignity. And at that moment, I felt a small victory. The atmosphere shifted dramatically as Jessica processed what we had just told her. Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the gears turning in her head. It wasn't just surprise on her face anymore. It was the first flicker of anger, a subtle but undeniable tremor of control slipping from her grasp. She had come here expecting to assert her dominance, to take over,
But instead, she was met with something she had not anticipated: resistance. "I don't understand," she finally stammered, her voice rising slightly. "Why are you doing this? This is our family home." I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for this moment, and it felt almost surreal to see her standing there, unable to manipulate the situation as she usually did. Robert remained composed, his silence a stark contrast to the tension crackling in the air. "It's not about the home, Jessica. It's about respect," he said calmly, but his words cut through the noise like a knife. The quiet response from him made her frustration even more palpable. She had expected us to fold, to cave into her demands as we had so many times before, but not this time. Not now. As she tried to regain control, I could see the hurt in her eyes, mixed with a sense of disbelief. It was clear that she wasn't used to being challenged, and I was beginning to realize just how much I had allowed her to walk all over me in the past. I wasn't going to let that happen again. But even as I stood firm, a part of me wondered, would she ever truly understand the depth of my pain? Would she ever come to realize the weight of the years I had sacrificed?
The tension between Jessica and I escalated in a way I hadn't expected. She was used to always getting her way, to bending us to her will with her demands and emotional manipulation. But this time, it wasn't working. I stood my ground, feeling the quiet strength that had been building in me for so long. Yet, even as I spoke, there was a strange sense of emptiness inside me. This wasn't just about the cabin, it was about everything that had come before it. "Mom, why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice now trembling with frustration. She was grasping for something, some way to turn this around, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't understand. "This isn't just about the cabin, Jessica. It's about how you've treated me all these years. It's about the way you've never once thought about what I needed, what I wanted. You've never seen me as anything but an obligation." The words stung, but they were true. She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. I could see her mind racing, trying to find an excuse, trying to place the blame somewhere else. But the truth was now in the open, hanging heavy between us. "You never understood me, Jessica. Not really. And that's why this is happening. Not because of the cabin, but because I've spent my life bending and twisting to make everyone else happy. And I'm done." I couldn't understand it. For so many years, I had been treated as if I didn't matter, as if my feelings didn't count. How could someone who had once been so close to me, my daughter-in-law, change overnight, turning her back on me without hesitation? Was it all about my age, my silence, my willingness to take a back seat in the family? The years of feeling invisible began to weigh heavily on my heart, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Wasn't it time to stop pretending that everything was fine, that I didn't feel this deep ache? I remember how, over the years, Jessica would look at me, her gaze cold, as if I were a fixture in her life, something to be tolerated. I watch her interact with others, my son, my grandchildren, and I felt a distance, a wall that I couldn't break down. It wasn't just neglect. It was as if I had become a ghost in my own family. How long could I bear this silent suffering before I would crack? The question lingered, unanswered. But as I thought about it, I realized something crucial. The more I allowed myself to be overlooked, the more I let the silence between us grow. I had given up so much of myself for others, always taking a back seat to their needs and desires. Wasn't it time to reclaim my voice? To stop tolerating the treatment I didn't deserve?
the more I thought about it, the more I understood that I wasn't just fighting for my place in this family, I was fighting for my dignity.
The days were growing quieter, and it was as if a heavy cloud was hanging over the house. Robert and I had decided to leave for a little while, to escape the tension and reclaim a small piece of peace. We drove to a small inn not far from the lake, where the air felt fresher, the silence more bearable. It wasn't a grand getaway, just a simple retreat where we could breathe without the weight of the world pressing down on us. As we settled into our room, I could feel the difference. Being away from the constant reminders of the mess Jessica had brought into our lives. I could hear the soft rustling of the trees outside the window, the sound of the water lapping gently against the shore. It was peaceful here, in a way that our home hadn't been for a long time. How had I let things get this far? It wasn't just Jessica's intrusion. It was everything. All the years of silence, all the unspoken words. But there was a part of me that wasn't sure about the choice we'd made. Was this just avoidance, or was it an act of self-preservation? I tried not to think about it, but the question lingered. How long would I be able to keep running from the truth, from the pain that had festered all these years? It didn't take long before Jessica reached out, her voice frantic on the other end of the phone. I could hear the desperation in her words, the sense of urgency that came from someone who was losing control. She begged me to come back, to fix things, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. She had pushed me too far, and now I wasn't going to be the one to fix it. Not this time. The silence between us felt suffocating, but I knew it was necessary. I didn't need to rush back to a situation that had drained me for years. My decision to stay away wasn't about being petty. It was about making her realize that her actions had consequences. She couldn't just walk into my life and demand things without considering how it would affect me. And yet, despite the silence, I couldn't help but wonder, did she even understand why I had made this choice? Was it too late for her to see the damage she had caused? And more importantly, was I strong enough to hold on to my decision? Or would I fall back into the same pattern of letting others dictate my life? Sitting in the quiet room, I began to reflect on everything that had brought me to this point. The years of sacrifice, the quiet resignation to my role in the family. It had all led me here, to a place where I was finally starting to recognize my own worth. How had I allowed myself to be so invisible for so long? The years I spent giving and giving, always expecting nothing in return, had created a deep wound in me that I could no longer ignore. But with this realization came something else, a sense of clarity. I could choose differently now. I didn't have to keep living in the shadow of others. My voice mattered. My needs mattered. It wasn't too late to start living for myself. The thought gave me strength, even if I wasn't sure how to take the first step. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been waiting for someone else to give me permission to live my life. But why? Why had I needed approval? I didn't need anyone to tell me that it was okay to take up space in the world, to demand respect. The only person who could give me that permission was me. Robert and I returned home, and it was as if everything had changed. The house, once full of tension, now felt empty in a different way. There was a weight in the air, a heaviness that I couldn't ignore. Even the walls seemed to close in on us as we sat in silence, contemplating what had happened. I could feel the absence of something. Was it peace? Or was it just the calm before the storm? As I looked at Robert, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't know what to expect, didn't know how long we could keep up this silence. But it wasn't just about the silence.
It was about the change that had taken place inside me. I wasn't the same woman who had left that house just a few days ago. I had made a choice, and that choice had reshaped me in ways I couldn't yet fully understand. But one thing was clear: the silence wasn't going to last forever. The world outside would eventually force us to speak, but would I be ready? Would I have the strength to face what was coming?
The phone call came on a quiet afternoon. Michael, my son, had finally decided to reach out. I hadn't heard from him in days, and as I listened to his voice on the other end of the line, I could hear the mix of concern and confusion in his words. He wanted to understand why I had made the decision I had. He wanted to know what had happened. I couldn't help but wonder, had he been so blind to what was going on all these years? How had he missed the signs, the things I had never said but had always felt? I didn't want to blame him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been complicit in all of this, by standing by, watching, but never truly seeing. As we spoke, I could feel a crack in my resolve. Was I going to let him off the hook? Was I ready to forgive him for his part in this? Or was this just another conversation in a long line of empty promises? I didn't know the answer, but I knew that this conversation was far from over. I didn't expect an apology from Michael. After all, it wasn't about him. It was about the years of neglect, the silent suffering I'd endured in the shadows. But here he was, on the other end of the line, his voice shaky as he admitted what he hadn't seen before. His words were carefully chosen, but they carried an unspoken weight, one I wasn't sure how to carry myself. He said he was sorry for not realizing the hurt, the little things that had been so evident to anyone who truly paid attention. But I had already built walls that had been constructed through countless small actions. How could a single apology undo everything? I didn't know how to respond to him. My thoughts were clouded, unsure of whether I should accept the words or let them drift away. Does he truly understand, or is he just saying the words to ease his guilt? I asked myself. I wanted to believe it, but deep down I feared it was just another instance of him seeing what was convenient to him. As the phone call ended, I found myself sitting by the window again, looking out at the lake. The waters were still, just like the silence that had fallen between us. I wasn't sure what this apology meant yet. Maybe in time I'd know. But for now, it was a moment, just like all the others, that brought more questions than answers.
Robert and I returned to the cabin. It was as if we had stepped back into a different world, one where the quiet held more meaning than the noise we had left behind. We didn't speak much on the way there. Neither of us needed to. We knew that this was our place of peace, and nothing could take that away. It was our space, our sanctuary, and I knew that no one could ever truly understand the depth of what it meant to us. The door creaked softly as we opened it, the familiar smell of cedar and fresh air enveloping us. The lake outside, still as a mirror, reflected the sky in its calm waters. But this time, everything felt different. It wasn't just the silence. It was the weight of what had happened, the way everything had shifted in the last few days. I sat down in my favorite chair by the window, the one that gave me the best view of the water. The quiet was comforting, but there was an ache in my chest, a dull throb that wouldn't go away. How could I return to a place that once brought me so much joy, only to find that it held the remnants of things unsaid, of broken bonds? It wasn't about the cabin anymore. It was about what I had left behind and what I was still trying to hold on to. I didn't know how to move forward, but somehow, sitting there, I knew that I would. Days passed, and Jessica finally reached out, but her attempt to reconcile, to acknowledge what had happened, was less than what I had hoped for. She didn't admit the full extent of her wrongs. She didn't apologize. Not really. What she offered was a fragile attempt at making things right, but it felt hollow. She still couldn't see the hurt she had caused, or maybe she just didn't want to. She tried to explain herself, tried to justify the things she had done, but I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. The truth was that it wasn't just about the visit to the cabin or the intrusion that had shattered our peace. It was the years of disregard, the subtle ways in which I had been pushed to the side. That's what hurt the most, and it was what I needed to hear her say. But she couldn't give me that, and so I didn't give her my forgiveness. I couldn't. Not yet. Not when I was still trying to find my own peace, and not when she was still blind to what she had taken from me. It wasn't about pride. It was about my own dignity, about holding on to something that felt real.
I finally told her. I told Jessica the truth. All the years of being neglected, all the quiet suffering I had endured without ever speaking up. It wasn't easy. It felt like I was ripping open old wounds, ones I had tried to forget for so long. But I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I needed her to understand, even if it meant confronting the past in ways I hadn't planned on. I was there for you when you needed me, I said, but you never saw me. You never saw me as more than a caretaker, a placeholder in your life. I gave you everything I had and you didn't even notice. Her face changed as I spoke. There was no anger in my words, only the quiet sorrow of someone who had been overlooked for too long. But I could see that the weight of my words was beginning to sink in. She didn't know how to respond. And maybe she wouldn't, not right away. But it was enough for me to finally say what I had held in for years. Michael, my son, had always been a good man, but he was blinded by his own life, by his own struggles, and he never truly saw the sacrifices I had made. I had accepted that long ago, but now something had changed in him. He was different. He was beginning to understand. He called me one evening, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Mom," he said, I didn't know. I didn't know what you had to go through to keep everything together." There was a break in his voice, one I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand then, but I see it now." It wasn't the words that mattered. It was the shift in his understanding. He was finally starting to see the complexity of the situation, the weight of the years of silence and sacrifice. And it gave me hope, a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could become the son I had always hoped he would be.
The silence between Jessica and me grew longer, and it was in that silence that I found clarity. She tried to call, tried to send messages, but I didn't respond. I needed time to think, to sort through everything I had been feeling. I couldn't do it all at once. And so I let the silence speak for me. It wasn't about shutting her out completely. It was about reclaiming my space, my peace, and my voice. I didn't need to explain myself to her. I needed to find my own way forward, and that meant taking a step back from the noise she had created. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was just tired, and I needed to rest in the quiet, to find what I had lost. After days of silence, Jessica finally sent me a message. It was different this time. No justifications, no excuses, just a simple, heartfelt apology. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I was wrong. I took you for granted, and I see that now." It wasn't easy for her to admit that, but it was real, and I knew it was something she had never done before. The walls I had built, the barriers I had erected around myself began to come down, but I wasn't ready to forgive just yet. It would take time. And it wasn't about her apology, it was about how I would choose to move forward. Slowly but surely,
the family began to reconnect. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. We began to learn how to set boundaries, how to respect each other's space, and how to communicate without taking each other for granted. It wasn't a smooth process. There were bumps along the way, but I could see that something had changed in them. Something had changed in me. Jessica was still learning. Michael was too, but we were all trying, in our own way, to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't about going back to how things were before. It was about creating something new, something stronger, something that could withstand the challenges we had all faced.
In the end, the peace I had longed for was mine, not because others had changed, but because I had chosen it. I had chosen to find my own voice, my own strength, and my own path. And with that choice, I had found a peace that no one could take away from me. The cabin, once a place of quiet refuge, had become a symbol of everything I had fought for. It wasn't just the lake or the silence that gave me peace. It was the realization that I had lived on my own terms, that I had finally learned to choose myself, no matter the cost. And as I sat by the window once again, watching the still water, I knew that I had won. I had found my peace. Sometimes we need to get lost in order to find ourselves again. And it was in my own solitude that I found the strength I had been searching for. Life taught me that in the midst of pain and silence, there is a silent power of transformation. What seemed like an imposition from others became, in fact, an opportunity for reconnection with myself. If there is one thing I've learned, it's that we can't expect others to give us the respect we deserve. We need to give it to ourselves first. It's not the absence of people around us that makes us feel alone, but the lack of respect we feel from those we love the most. So I ask you, what would you do if you were in my place? Would you accept what others impose, or would you rise to reclaim what is rightfully yours? The answer, my dears, could change your life. Don't let this reflection pass unnoticed. If you identified with my story, share it in the comments. And remember, every story has something to teach. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and come follow the next one. After all, what does tomorrow hold for us?